Well, hi, everybody. My name is Garrett Schmidt. I am the managing editor for VBC Exhibit Hall, and I'd like to welcome everyone here today to today's live panel discussion that's hosted by the Institute for Advancing Health Value. I'm really excited to hear from these speakers today, and Eric Weaver is a good friend of mine, so really honored to have him with us. Today's webinar is titled Reskilling and Upskilling: the workforce of the future of value-based care. So this is a topic that I know a lot of you guys are interested in. We do have a lot of folks in the audience today, so welcome, glad you're here. A few items of note before we get started. Everyone has joined today in listen-only mode, so this is a traditional webinar format. We can't see you or hear you, but we do want to hear from you, and we are going to have some time for some Q&A towards the end, and would love to hear your questions. So if you have a question that you would like to submit, each one of you should have a little control module that's for as an attendees, and there's a little question place in there. So go ahead and drop your question in there if you would. It's actually different than the chat, but go ahead and put your question. We'll get to as many as we can. If we can't get to yours for some reason, we run out of time, someone will get back to you via email. So go ahead and ask your question, even if you think we might run out of time. Finally, today's session is being recorded, so you should receive an email an hour or two after the end of the presentation, and that will have a link to the recording. We don't have a lot of slides today, but there will also be a place where you can download the couple slides that we have there as well, and you'll be able to share that with colleagues and review it later. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Eric Weaver, and he is the Executive Director at the Institute of Advancing Health Value. And again, a good friend of mine, so excited to hear from him, and he will introduce our other speakers. So welcome, Eric.
Well, Garrett, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with you and everyone else today. I'm so excited about this topic, reskilling and upskilling of the workforce for the future of value-based care. This is an exciting opportunity. Right now, industry is at an inflection point. We need to mobilize our workforce to reorient them around relationship-based, holistic models of care that can go upstream, improve outcomes, address inequities, leverage technology. And I have such an amazing group of masterminds. We're going to discuss everything related to this topic in terms of how to go about approaching some of these hefty workforce challenges as we solidify a path forward for the future of healthcare. We're joined today by Dr. Richard Walker, CEO and founder of TVB Care, Jeffrey Roche, Senior Vice President of National Healthcare Practice of Core Education PBC, and Jan Joan Shank, Executive Dean Emeritus of Western Governors University. My name is Eric Weaver. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Advancing Health Value. We're a peer learning collaborative. We provide an ecosystem for sharing and ideation of best and collaboration, providing intelligence and platform for sharing best practices. If you're in a provider organization like an ACO or a health system or physician practice, we have an opportunity for you to join our open source platform so you can access all the intelligence that you need to navigate some of these important challenges of the day. So I wanted to go ahead and start our conversation today. As Garrett mentioned, we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for questions, so please feel free to put those into the questions portion of the meeting platform. So as we start our discussion today, as I mentioned earlier, we have this huge undertaking. We have to think about how do we provide interdisciplinary patient-centered care that goes upstream, addresses barriers in health. I mean, that's the future of our industry, and we have to think about workforce readiness to deliver on this promise of high value, equitable, high quality care. So as we start our panel discussion today, I wanted to just pose the question to all of you on the panel today: how should healthcare organizations approach the alignment of value-based strategic planning within their enterprise level workforce strategy? And then should workforce education for value-based care, is that something that should be managed by the strategy and transformation team, or is this an HR function? I mean, this is such a high stakes opportunity. How do we develop this execution capability for the future of these care models? Jeffrey, would you like to start the conversation today on that?
Sure, happy to. I think First and foremost, I will always say that anything workforce related should never be just housed in human resources. You know, everyone has to be at the table, and I think what's critical about this is, you know, for example, if you're talking about nursing workforce as it relates to value-based care, it shouldn't just be the chief nursing officer, but it also should be frontline nurses who are providing care in the ICU, in the emergency room, in the outpatient settings and other inpatient settings, so that we're truly engaging our nursing clinicians who are on the front lines, who are truly providing that value-based care. I think to your point though, strategy and transformation play a really pivotal role, but so do quality. You know, from the perspective of we're going to really advance quality, we've got to have those individuals at the table. We've got to also have, you know, our CIOs, but again, the point that I would make, and you know, I want to give time to our other panelists, is we've got to really start to think just getting out of the C-suite and really make sure that our clinicians and our providers at all levels are truly engaged in this reimagining of the workforce. Because whether you're inpatient or outpatient, we have historically been a little bit too much about let's get the C-suite to guide this. I would encourage us to get all of our stakeholders to really be part of the solution.
Jan, Dr. Walker, what are your thoughts on this?
And I'll go after you.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I agree, Jeffrey, that it really is an all hands on deck situation in terms of how many different perspectives are going to be important to solve these problems. But I go back to kind of the basics, and that is that how an organization focuses its goals, its strategy, etc., really permeates through the entire organization. So if we've had largely a transactional healthcare system forever based on a fee-for-service model. So when that is how you run your business, everything comes down to cost centers, cost efficiency, the big labor cost, etc. And that's part of why we're in, I think, a really difficult time right now with workforce, is the real value drivers. The people who drive value in healthcare are the people who are providing the healthcare. And we've had it backwards for a very long time. We've said, oh, these people cost us a lot of money. If you flip the equation and you make the model and the focus about value, quality, and outcomes, then all of a sudden, those people for whom we need their creativity, their passion, and their joy to get us to health become value drivers, not cost centers.
I'd like to answer your question, Eric, with a question. I'm going to answer it, but the question that I ask is who's listening? Who's listening to the voices that make a difference to make the change? When we talk about the inflection point, who's listening with or to the stakeholders that are at risk for us not doing anything? And so the patients are listening. They're not listening in the sense that they are in the boardroom, but in some cases, maybe they should be. Are they listening to the providers? Because we have gotten to a point where the provider's voice has less value than what it used to. And then who's listening to the people in the C-suites? You know, there's this dichotomy, there's this headbutting that we encounter in healthcare, where the providers don't want to listen to the people in the C-suite, and the people in the C-suite don't want to listen to the providers because they say the providers, they don't know business. All they know is healthcare. Well, you know, it's all part of the same formula. So the question is, who's listening? I'd like to take up one of the points that Jeffrey mentioned about the HR. One of the things that I think is a huge mistake operationally is that too often in the C-suite, when you have the boardroom, the head of HR is not part of that team. Now, how can that be when we're looking at changing the paradigm in healthcare about value? You've got to know at the entry point the kind of people that you're bringing in, who you want to bring the value to the entire organization. Well, that value begins at the front door. Who's managing the front door? HR. So HR has to be at the table. Too often they're not. And then if we bring it down a few notches and look at the entire organization has to understand that that the organization only functions and maximizes its capability when all brains are in the game. So to answer your question, everybody who's part of the team must be included, and all voices should be heard, whether you like what they're going to say or not.
So Dr. Walker, I heard you mention earlier this concept of an inflection point, and we certainly think about that in terms of value transformation, the need for cost accountability, equity. But, I was looking at a recent survey of health system CEOs, and the number one challenge is workforce. And, we're reeling still in the aftermath of the pandemic, and there's a critical shortage of nurses, and it's almost like we're in a dichotomy because we need professionals that have these nascent, skill sets to contribute meaningfully to the evolution of our care delivery model, but we also need just warm bodies almost to, deliver care. And, as I think about this, this scale and impact of workforce skill in the value-based care movement, it's clearly going to be a force multiplier or an impedance for change. And we have to have a workforce that, is able to acquire these new knowledge, skills, and abilities, and really kind of transcend the brick and mortar of the hospital or health system and get away from this transaction-focused care delivery that you mentioned, Jan, and really have an outcomes-based focused, and can go upstream and work with patients where they are in the communities where they live, they learn, they play, they're very much living their lives. So, I wanted to see what you all thought about how do we create these scalable and affordable educational solutions that can address both the critical workforce shortages, but also the team-based care capabilities that are needed to deploy a lot of these population health-based interventions. I mean, are there use cases out there for innovation in higher education that healthcare employers can look to?
If I may, can I start off with that?
Sure.
There are, as we were talking about the organizational structure, the operations in healthcare being the business model or the business side of healthcare, we have to step away from that just a little bit and then ask a couple of other questions. Where is the greatest workforce that can bring the most value to what we're talking about in terms of value-based care? That's at the community level. It's community involvement. And one of the things, and Erica, you and I, we've discussed this a number of times. One of the things that I feel that really has been overlooked is really to mobilize the community and what the community brings to the table in terms of who we serve. Now, the community or the people in the community, the informal caregivers, if you will, they know what the situation and the circumstances are in the community. As the workforce at the higher end of our society, doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals, as that is under strain, certainly it would seem to be that we can connect the dots and say there's a greater workforce out there that can do so much more, and they have so much more knowledge about what we must do in order to deliver the value-based care that everyone is trying to approach. And as we talk about that, even before we get to those licensed people, they have to be trained. And part of the problem is the training is not meeting the needs of what we are transitioning to in terms of value-based care.
Yeah, this is really my wheelhouse too, Richard. So I'll get on my soapbox for just a second here and say, I couldn't agree with you more. We have undervalued the community resources, and we have also continued to have these these barriers to entry into healthcare in the form of these artificial constructs around licensure, around certification. And so as we move towards hopefully a more skills-based, competency-based model for preparing healthcare professionals, we can create these pathways where I can start as an EMT in my community, or a home health aide, or a medical assistant, and actually have that build on that set of skills into a career in nursing, social work, medicine, whatever it is. Right now, those pathways don't exist because everyone is sort of a segment, right? They're very segmented, they're very walled off. And yes, if you were an EMT, that might help you get into nursing school, but we're not going to recognize your skills. If you were a medic, we're not going to recognize your skills. We're not going to let you advance based on the competencies that you have, because we have a pre-planned agenda for your education, and everybody goes through it. And I think that time is behind us. Hopefully, we will see that in the rearview mirror sometime soon, because we cannot afford to continue this model of education. One last thing I'll say is understanding the basics of value-based care is important at every level, every single level. Because if you're still measuring the time spent with a patient when you're an EMT, and you're measuring the time spent with a patient when you're a physician, that metric is wrong. That is the wrong metric. Time just measures time. Doesn't measure quality, doesn't measure outcomes. So those metrics, or those ways of thinking about what's important in the care process, have to be understood and educated at every level across the workforce.
Yeah, what I would add to that is, I was just speaking with a healthcare executive recently, and she shared a story with me of how a physician had just recently left their organization alone on the issue of volume, because the physician felt that she was being pushed to see a certain number of patients still in this world we are today, over actually addressing the needs of her patients. And she got to a point where she said, I feel I'm put at risk. I'm not able to truly authentically meet the needs of my patients because you're pushing me to see a certain number of patients within a 30-minute window. 15 minutes for each patient is just hogwash. We should have intentional work around meeting the needs of our patients. The second thing I would just add is I think Jan and I have talked about this a lot. I grew up in a community hospital, literally as a young child, while my mother was a nurse. I happened to then serve in that same community hospital as an administrator. And I truly believe we as a healthcare system, while we've become larger and we have now these integrated delivery systems that are very, very large in most cases, a few major ones now really dominating the market when you truly think about it. Just look at the merger of Advocate Aurora with Atrium as an example. We've got to get back to the basics of what a community hospital was all about. And that was being an anchor institution in the community that it served. And to your point, Eric, if eds and meds, education and healthcare, come together and recognize that we're both anchor institutions, we're anchored in that community. The leadership comes from that community. The clinicians come from that community. We serve that community, to Dr. Walker's point, authentically. We go to churches and meet the needs in the faith-based community. We do outreach in a very dynamic way. We truly move the healthcare of that community forward. I would actually argue that community hospitals were doing value-based care way before anyone knew what true value-based care was. But now, because of how regulations and other things have happened, we've taken that away. There are programs, for example, Medicare used to have, and still does, but used to have a pretty robust sole community hospital designation for hospitals that served communities that were at disadvantage. There are less sole community hospitals today because of all the changes that Medicare and others have made. And so, I think we've got to go back and really understand what we've lost in having healthcare become larger. And I would argue that we've lost the focus on the patients, and more importantly, we've lost the focus on our staff. And if we don't take care of our staff, and to your point, Eric, that very survey you cited, also number 2 issue is mental health. If we don't take care of our staff, they and our providers, they'll never be able to take care of our patients. And so we've got to get back to those basics too.
Jeffrey, I really appreciate your comments on the connection that we need with the patients to which we serve. And, as we're now coming to terms with what the value movement really means, I mean, there's this, I hope it's a universal recognition at this point that it goes beyond just the payment model, but it really comes down to the relationship. And as we think about developing trust and activating, segments of the population, to bring about the best outcomes. The research shows irrefutably that culturally competent care models are more effective in overcoming the risk associated with communication barriers and racial stereotyping and all the false beliefs and structural kind of racism and other barriers that manifest itself within society and the care delivery system as we know it. And so I really wanted to kind of take our conversation in terms of, how do we go about building the necessary level of trust, especially with minoritized and marginalized patient populations to improve the outcomes. Can you all discuss the importance of culturally competent care, and then why is this so much more than just DEI? Why is it something that we really need to be thinking about as leaders in the value movement that is really a vehicle to which, if we can provide a culturally competent workforce that reflects the attributes and the characteristics of the population being served, that we can actually improve and transform care delivery? And then where does education and higher ed, kind of what role do they play in making sure that there's a pipeline for diverse talent?
Well, I'll start off again, Eric. It's a great question. One of the most important things I think that is being missed in this paradigm shift that we have, that we're calling value-based care, as big as it is, some of the smallest things will interfere with the progression of this shift. And one of the things that I target is implicit bias, which is hardly ever touched. We talk about it, but I don't see anything structural or operational that mitigates implicit bias in the education process of nurses and doctors and healthcare professionals. I don't see where there's any training. We talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and I'm blocking on and inclusion. Thank you.
Inclusion, yeah.
And we talk about that, but there's nothing structural to move against it. And let me give you something very simple. In order to inhibit implicit bias, which in healthcare not only alters the focus of the attention of the provider towards the patient, it can impact negatively the outcomes of care for any patient, any group, whether it's about race or LGBTQ, it doesn't matter. And a simple tool can be taught, which isn't being taught, which is attentive listening. Attentive listening is very simple. Teach students how to focus in on the speaker and what the speaker is saying, and to divert the listener from dwelling on their own thoughts while the speaker is speaking. Attentive listening. What it does is it suspends one's implicit bias to give that listener enough time to hear and appreciate the cultural concerns that come with the issues of their health. And if we're not listening, nothing else matters. And so it's something that could be very easily be done and taught in schools. I saw one study that showed that the DEI courses that people take only last, but maybe about 2 weeks before they revert back to where they were before they took a course. But attentive listening is something that you do all the time. And it has to be inclusive in every patient encounter. So why isn't this being taught, something so simple that can mitigate the kind of danger that we have in this transition to value?
Jan, Jeffrey, did you have anything else to add, on culturally competent care and ways that leaders should be kind of thinking about this critical issue and how that fits into a value strategy?
I would add that I think I would encourage individuals particularly to take a look at the work occurring at the More in Common Alliance, which is truly a fundamental partnership that truly is really rooted between a healthcare system and an institute of higher education. Common Spirit Health and the Morehouse School of Medicine coming together to truly look at addressing exactly what Dr. Walker is speaking to. And I think what's critical about it is they've also built it based on experience. And if, for those who've ever heard Dr. Alicia Jackson, the president of the Human Kindness Institute at Common Spirit, talk about her own story with giving birth to her child, where she almost could have lost her child because of the implicit bias in our healthcare system and the lack of recognition of what she was saying as a physician. Mind you, her challenges were in her pregnancy, yet they didn't necessarily listen to Dr. Walker's point, and she almost could have lost her child in the same way that Serena Williams has talked about. And so I think that there's some incredible work, but because Jan's here, I also want to just acknowledge, we do have the mother of competency education, which, when Jan built what she did at Western Governor, she built it with all these facets in mind. And I don't want to forget, acknowledging the work that Jan has done across this country to really ensure that nursing education has always had this. And she's also done it in a way to make others, to get the National Association and others to recognize competency-based speaks to how important this work is. But, Jan, I want to give you a chance, obviously, and applaud you for that work that you've done.
Thanks so much, Jeffrey. It's very kind of you. I would just add, when I did my first research on emotional intelligence in staff nurses in the 2010, what I found was that emotional intelligence is like a muscle, in that if it's not exercised and leveraged and worked all the time, it erodes, it atrophies. And so, nurses who've been in practice for a long time, just by virtue of the constant barrage of inputs, and this is true of physicians too, just this constant connection and closeness with these incredibly intensive human experiences. As humans, we employ these safety strategies to protect ourselves from moral injury, to protect ourselves from the constant impact of being the closest of anyone to the human experience, life, death, birth, illness, aging. All of these are incredibly intense human experiences. And so healthcare providers, you know, Richard, I'm going to really go back to what you were saying. It's a continuous process of understanding and processing our own emotions, of understanding how to keep our emotional intelligence muscles well exercised, of understanding. And we implemented a program for all of our health profession students, nurses, et cetera, everyone, about social and emotional learning. It included this attentive listening skill set. It included the mindfulness skill set. It really emphasized that, you know, the emotional and mental health of providers is so crucial, and understanding one's own self and being able to bring one's authentic self to that patient experience. That is a big part of this whole cultural competence thing as well, Eric. I mean, I think, you know, being able to be authentic and present and attentively listening to patients, it reveals so much and it empowers the patient. We are suffering right now from great disillusionment. Patients are deeply disillusioned about healthcare and about who they can trust. And this, in my opinion, is the way to turn that ship around, by empowering providers with the skills that they can use to authentically engage with patients.
Well, Jan, I would love to. Well, Jan, I would love to build on this premise of, you know, authentic, you know, patient care, and you know how that that social and emotional learning component factors into the workforce. And at risk of gross, you know, simplification of value-based care, I can't help but think about, you know, how this transition to a more patient-centered, accountable, equitable, you know, care model is going to help the frontline workers develop deeper and more trusting relationships with patients and overcome their own suffering in the process. I mean, you know, Jeffrey, you mentioned this is like the second thing that's weighing, you know, most heavily on the minds right now, other than, you know, financial distress and acute workforce shortages, is just this moral injury and burnout that we're seeing across all the different professions. You know, so I'd love for us to explore what is this connection between cultural transformation towards value-based care delivery and this amelioration of clinician burnout and moral injury. I mean, is this promise of value-based care, is this going to be a boon for professional fulfillment that's lacking, you know, so much in the workforce currently? And anybody that wants to lead off, I'll, you know, feel free.
Well, let me just pick up where on one of the words that Jan used that I often introduce into a conversation about healthcare, and it's so simple that we miss it. And it's one of the reasons why African Americans, if you ask African Americans to engage in something new in healthcare, they're not interested. They don't want to be bothered. The bottom line is, and that one word is trust. And so you can underline everything that you just mentioned, Eric, in terms of where do we go, or is this a truism in terms of where we're going? Is it just for the professionals? The bottom line and the commonality is trust. If the community doesn't trust you, nothing else matters. Period.
Yep.
I don't care what your degree is. I don't care how smart you are, how many papers you wrote. I don't care how many patients you see or how few you would like to see. So you can say that you're maximizing your professional acumen. It doesn't matter if they don't trust you. And what you have in healthcare in America at the grassroots level is the lack of trust. And let me just give one structural example. We were talking about community involvement. We're talking about faith-based programs and informal caregivers. I don't understand why the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid have yet to introduce an ICD-10 code for having training to make informal caregivers competent with micro-credentials so that billing can be done. Why is that so difficult? It's 407, it's $4.3 trillion in medical expenses for healthcare last year, of which the 5%ers, which are the 5% of the population that account for 60% of all the expenses, that comes out to be 2.88 trillion. Are you telling me that a portion of those dollars can't be spent on training the 46 million people who are considered informal caregivers to become entry-level healthcare providers? What am I missing? And again, this is about trust. So if you have the most prolific payer in healthcare not doing something that could be beneficial for the entire system and country, and they have yet to do it, why would I trust you to do anything else? So it's little things like that. And trust, although it's a small word, it is everything that we're talking about.
It's a big problem, trust with the patients, the communities that we serve, and then, just the trust of the current workforce. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of working professionals, in the health care system that, feel slighted and, disrespected and marginalized, coming out of a pandemic. They feel like they weren't taken care of. We learned early on the pandemic, the acute PPE shortages, and I've even heard anecdotal stories of executives that try to cheer up their nurses with cookies, and it's just very hollow in terms of the focus on really creating an environment to which we can deliver trust in relationship-based care. I have to think value-based care has a role to play somewhere in terms of getting our workforce in a position where it can actually trust in the system again too.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Richard. We're at a point here, and the inflection point isn't maybe the workforce, and maybe it's not value-based care. Maybe it's trust. Because we're at a time when we're seeing a lot of distrust about all traditional organizations. I mean, I'll just talk for a minute about higher ed. The shine is sort of off the college degree right now. When you have 1.3 trillion in student debt, people are really thinking long and hard. I just heard a podcast yesterday, a group that was working to improve engagement in the trades, and they interviewed a young woman who had become a welder, who was on the path to become a plastic surgeon, and she decided to become a welder instead because she came out of school with no debt, and she makes six figures, and she loves her work, and she gets to employ the very creativity that she intended to employ in another way. So the affordability of higher ed is a serious problem for us on the workforce front. And higher ed and healthcare are very similar in a lot of ways. We have a lot of the same challenges that we're trying to overcome. And I would just say this, I do think there's hope. I do think there's a hopeful future here, but it's going to take some bold action. You know, the example you gave, Richard, is an example of bold action. I think it's going to take bold action at the individual health system level. This is always probably my most unpopular position, but I'll state it again here. I think that hospital system CEOs should forego all bonuses, and that their compensation should be tied to A1C levels in their community, to high blood pressure control levels in their community, to maternal mortality rates in their community. That we should, we need that kind of bold leadership where the leaders of our health system step up and say, I'm going to put myself on the line here and say our whole system is in on outcomes and changing disparities in the health in our community, and I'm going to put all of my, you know, all of my bet on that. And I think, while maybe some would say that's not possible, I think there's some bold leaders out there that are willing to step forward.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Jen, I know you and I have talked about this before too. I would add that we've got to really do a lot of work, particularly with our boards and trustees at these systems, to understand that, you know, ultimately they've got to hold the CEO accountable and the leadership team accountable to, you know, to exactly what Jan talked about. And, you know, I know that this is a huge debate that always happens. In fact, I had it just recently with a group of healthcare executives again. But, you know, honestly, I think there should be, you know, look, every nonprofit healthcare system has a physician on the board. It's usually the chief of the staff, of the medical staff. But why is there not a nurse on the board? When nurses make up so much of the workforce in every healthcare system, why isn't there a voice of nursing on the board? Why is it that only 4% of our boards actually have a nurse or a retired nurse on the board? And frankly, if you look at the number and percentage of board members who have ever worked in healthcare, it's significantly low. Less than 10% have ever worked in healthcare. Yeah. So you've got boards that really don't understand a thing about how healthcare works, and also are just accepting what the CEO tells them 9 times out of 10, not going to the front lines, which I would argue a board member should, because when I serve on a board, I want to understand what the staff are dealing with, because you know what, ultimately I've got to hold the executive responsible. But if I just listen to the executive, I'm not going to ever really hear the truth. Mm-hmm. And the other point I would just make is we've got to Jan's point about boldness, we've got to get boards to expand what they believe fiduciary is. Fiduciary is not just financial. Yes, they've got to be thinking about the future, but the future includes issues of patient safety, quality, equity, and also workforce. If you don't have any of those all included and they're not priorities, guess what? The finances don't matter, because you're not going to have any finances. And that's what we're seeing today. I mean, if we really want to be honest about where we sit today, no healthcare system, frankly, is making any money. And I would argue, and I know we've had this discussion in the past with others, I would argue it's now time to think about what does the future healthcare system look like, and actually maybe look at a new model where we build fresh. Because I'm not so sure we can fix what's there because it's so systemic. I would even argue in the higher ed space, we have that same challenge too. We've got some very systemic things. Mm-hmm. We've got to probably look at entirely new models that not only incentivize, but really think about what is in it for the student, what is in it for the patient. Our models today do not say that. It's all about what is in it for others, not the patients and not the students.
Well, Jeffrey, and organizations began to every organization, every single organization reaches a point where its sole purpose is to sustain itself. And that's kind of, I think, the point where disillusionment really starts to enter, and that trust factor really starts to get to be a big factor. So I agree with you, Jeffrey. I do wonder whether redevelopment or redesign is possible. Maybe evolution is not possible. Maybe only revolution is possible.
And you mentioned being bold. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Hospital requires that anyone with a title above a vice president and above must put on the line 15% of their income based upon patient outcome performance in the community. And they have
That's
to meet
terrific.
certain metrics for the community in order to get a bonus, or in order to get that 15% that's at the top of their pay scale.
That's terrific. That's the kind of action that's really meaningful, I think.
Well, we have a lot of action required. I agree. This is a revolution that's going to take place, whether or not we like it or not. If anything, just out of the necessity that we have from a economic perspective. I do want to take some audience questions, but I wanted to wrap on one last question for you all. And Jan, you had discussed earlier in your comments about the lack of trust in institutions, and I can't help but think about higher ed and healthcare, both dealing with those issues. I mean, just a few days ago, over the weekend, the Wall Street Journal had an article about how Americans have lost faith in the college degree, and as we're talking about reskilling and upskilling of the workforce and the potential for competency-based education, I do want to discuss where there might be a revolution in education. I mean, certainly WGU has led the way in competency-based education over the last 25 years, but are there also opportunities as we're looking at emerging skill sets and roles for value-based care transformation? Are there opportunities for industry validated skills and badging and short form programs like certificates and micro credentials? I'd love to kind of wrap on some of your insights in terms of where we see education going and how it can best align workforce capabilities with value transformation. Jan, would you like to start that?
Well, yeah, I'll just say a couple of things about that. I'm a big fan of the micro credential, the certificate programs that help people develop basic skills. In nursing for many years, I was formerly president of the American Nurses Credentialing Center, and we had 30 certificates for specialization in everything from nursing leadership to nursing informatics to a whole range, pediatrics, medical surgical nursing, a whole range of specializations. And so I think there's definitely a precursor to what we're talking about, which is upskilling in value-based care. And I would just say that one of the potentials here that I think is kind of exciting is, you're doing an upskilling of value-based care, and you've got a diverse group of learners all together. So this is something that we don't do very well now. We have all the nurses in one room and all the pharmacists in another room and all the physicians in another room. And the medical assistants, no, they're not in the same room with the licensed people. And, the home health aides, no, they know all about community, but they can't be in here because they aren't, on the hierarchy. But in this value-based care, short form learning, whether it's a certificate or whatever, everyone could be there. Everyone could be in the room together, learning from each other. That's an incredibly powerful educational opportunity, in my opinion, and that's something I think we should all be in on. And the other piece of that is the only way that value-based care is actually going to be successful, in my opinion, from a workforce perspective, is if there is a level of knowledge and competencies at scale, right? So you've got, 1,500 people working in a healthcare organization. If only 2 of them know about value-based care, ain't gonna happen. But if you have 100 or 150, 10% of them, now you're at scale, those people have the opportunity to help infuse that culture. So I think the interprofessional piece, the short form learning, and the scale are 3 key factors.
Eric, I would just
Jan,
add that, one of the innovations that I do think higher ed can be a major player in this is credit for prior learning. I mean, if you look at some of the work occurring in credit for prior learning at a WGU, but also, at the American College of Education, Advent Health University, and many others, nursing programs, but others in this, in the sphere, what's occurring there is some innovative way, more boldness actually, to embrace the idea that you could come in with a certificate, get trained, earn a national certification, and then come back to a nursing program with actual credits because of your credit for prior learning. That's what higher ed has to do more in. I've always been amazed that it's taken higher ed that long to realize that, because at the core is education and it's preparation. But I'm encouraged that we're seeing more and more institutions start to understand that that's truly a revolution, actually. To actually get faculty to buy into that is revolutionary, and we're seeing that happen across the country in a really encouraging way. So that's just one thing I would add that I've been encouraged by, and I think as that grows, we're going to see a lot more buy-in.
Jan, what you described is called health equity.
Say more, Richard.
Well, I wanted to take a question or two from the audience, so let me go ahead and pose this to you here. From Charles Bolt, he's asking, how should we retrain large numbers of newly, initiated value-based healthcare providers to succeed by engaging patients in self-management, supporting caregivers, coordinating community resources, functioning as this interdisciplinary collegial team member. Can you provide some comments just on the patient activation, the importance of health literacy, and where that intersects with workforce capability?
Is that an open question for anyone?
Anyone that wants to lead.
I'm not sure I understand the full context of the question, but I think one of the important things to understand is that in order to achieve what the questioner is saying, in organizations such as the very organization that we are sitting down that has put together this webinar is such an organization that is giving that kind of structure that allows for this to occur. And the unfortunate thing is that it can only occur in bits and pieces. We don't have the whole meal in front of us. So we can do a webinar here and a seminar there and a workshop here. But again, going back to Jan's point, what I don't see in America as a whole is a bold statement from a political heavyweight. John Kennedy said, let's go to the moon. Well, it's going to take someone such as the president or someone of that caliber to say, listen, what we have in healthcare today is not acceptable, and we're going to do something different, and then lay out an agenda where we can hit the home run based upon a structured model rather than bits and pieces.
Yeah, I would just add to the question, and I think it's a really good one, because one of the things that we fail to do in healthcare is to really activate patients and unleash their power into their own health experience. And I thought that was part of what the subtext of that question was. It kind of goes back to what we've talked about a lot already, and that is we need trust. We need knowledge and skills about value-based care. We need knowledge and skills about listening, engaging, and if we are successful in conveying a safe and place and a sense of trust to patients, think of the power of them regaining or accepting control over their own health care. The power of that is enormous, and we've pushed that down forever. We've said, no, we'll take care of this for you. Listen to me. I know what's best. If we could activate patients, it sort of goes back a little bit to what Richard was talking about in terms of the community health activation too. It's a groundswell of action that would help and sort of tilt this system in the right direction, I think.
Jeffrey, I'll give you the last word. Parting thoughts of wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would add to that is I do feel that within this we have to also be bold, particularly around the licensing and the regulation side of this, because for so long in education we've had to teach to this, yet what we're teaching to isn't necessarily where we sit, here in 2023. And so I think we need people, professionals at all levels to say to the licensing boards and to the regulatory boards and to the accrediting bodies, come on, wake up and smell the coffee. Are you actually understanding what's happening on the front lines? Are you understanding what's happening in the academy? Do you see what's changed? I think we're still acting as if we're in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s in a time in 2023. So much has not changed by those accrediting bodies, by the licensing boards. And I think it's a shame because we're practicing medicine, we're practicing nursing, we're practicing a whole litany of different things as if we think it's like today, but we're really practicing, in the past. Yet our demands are so different and our patients' needs are so different. And so I think we're going to have to be bold there too, which is going to require, to Dr. Walker's point, bold action at a level that, I know, Eric, you do incredible work to try and get people to understand this. We're going to have to get a lot more people and get a little bit more lobbyists to wake up and also be willing to do what's right for the patient. And I know they don't tend to do that because they're not getting paid by the patients. But for the lobbyists out there, do your job, because if you change the system, everyone benefits and you're all going to still have a job. And so I think we've got to get boldness there too.
Well, we need bold action. We need big picture thinking. We need trust, and it's going to be a moonshot, but we have to be optimistic. This is our future. It's the generations down the line, and value-based care education coming together. Big things can happen. I wanted to thank all of you, our esteemed panelists, for joining us today. Garrett, I'll let you go ahead and take the mic if you want to provide some closing comments.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you all, each of you, so much. This is a wonderful discussion. I think I could have listened to you all day, but unfortunately, we've got to cut it here. But wanted to thank everyone for joining us. As we close out, wanted to encourage you to head over to bbcexhibithall.com and check out the Institute for Advancing Health Values virtual booth there. And there's going to be a link to that in the slides. But it's a place where you can see a lot of cool material, things that they're working on, interact with their team there, and learn a little bit more. So come join us over there. And then finally, if you would like to get a hold of the team or any of the speakers, feel free to reach out. You can reach Ashley Schwartz here, and she'll put you in touch with any of them, or feel free to reach out to me as well, and I'm happy to facilitate an introduction for you. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. This is a great discussion, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. So join us next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
All right, great job. Looks like, yeah, there we go. People are dropping off, but amazing conversation.